Hello and welcome to the Songwriting Podcast, where we build our songwriting muscles together. My guest today is Ivan Bodley, also known as Funkboy. He's a bass player and music director to the Stars. He has performed with 50 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. He's appeared in 12 Broadway shows and has been inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame. And he can currently be seen on tour with Humble Pie. I had a wonderful conversation with Ivan, and he had some amazing insights for me when it comes to songwriting. Stuff that I hadn't even considered, and it was a super useful conversation, which goes to show you that old dogs can definitely learn new tricks. But before we get into my conversation with Ivan, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, which is the Indie Bible. If you are an independent artist, you need to be putting your best foot forward and being proactive in your music career. You need to build an awareness of your music through radio airplay, reviews, interviews, and features. The Indie Bible will help you build your brand with contact information for over 7,000 radio stations, music blogs, and music magazines that want to hear your story and showcase your music. Listings are from the United States, Canada, the UK, Europe, Australia, Asia, and everywhere else. If you're ready to start reaching out and getting some ears on your music, visit songwriting.net/bundle. That's songwriting.net/bundle to get instant access to the best deal available on the Indie Bible Ultimate Bundle today. So that's songwriting.net/bundle. This is the best investment you can make for your music today. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the show, and don't forget to leave comments and reviews wherever you are. That really helps me to reach more people. If you want some great free resources for songwriters, head over to songwriting.net right now for some great content that will help you be more confident, productive, and successful as a songwriter. And that's also where you'll find the show notes to each episode. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get into my conversation with Ivan Bodley. Here we go. All right, welcome to the Songwriting Podcast, Ivan Bodley. Welcome.
Hey, man.
Thanks for having me. Or should I say Funkboy?
I've been called many things. I've been called much worse than that. So anything, I answer to all of them. It's all good, man.
Yeah. I have a name nobody can pronounce, so I'm used to being called. I just say, as long as you don't call me Josephine, I'm good.
I get a lot of "Hey you." It works for me. That's fine.
Sure. Hey you with the hair. Yeah.
You see me with the hair. It's funny if you see me in an airport somewhere. I obviously people think that I am somebody. They're confusing me with X, Y, or Z rock star because I've got the hair and I've got a guitar on my shoulder. Like that must be so and so. And I'm like, no, but thanks anyway. Nice to see you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from in your music journey, and tell me everything.
All right. Well, here's the tagline for the bio. I've played with 50 inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I've performed in 12 Broadway shows. I am an inductee into the New York Blues Hall of Fame, graduate of Berklee College of Music in Boston, and I've been a professional full-time freelance electric bass player and acoustic bass player in New York City for about the last 30 years now, I hesitate to say, but it seems to be working out. I paid the rent for all that time playing my stupid bass guitar, and pretty happy about it.
Well, that's the important part.
Yeah. Keep the lights on, keep the heat on, and we're good. Everything else is gravy at that point.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. You mentioned Berklee, and I have almost no formal education in music. I'm mostly self-taught. What little music theory I know has been picked up along the way.
Sure.
And obviously a music education is not necessary to be a professional musician. Otherwise,
absolutely
I wouldn't be one.
Right.
But I'd love to know, what are the areas where that helps? Because surely it must help in a lot of areas.
It has. Now, I went to Berklee late in life. I didn't go straight out of high school like most people get there when they're 17 years old. I got there when I was 26. I'd already gone to college.
Ancient.
Yeah, ancient, a million years old. I'd already gone to college as a biomedical engineering major, ended up graduating with a psychology degree instead, had basically majored in, truthfully, college radio. I was a music director of my college station. And then from that, got a job at Epic Records as a major label publicist. So I went straight into the music industry and stayed there for 3 years before I realized that the music business has almost nothing to do with music. It's all about business. It's all about marketing. So as somebody who aspired to be creative, I dropped out of the business. I handed in my corporate Amex card. I said, here, this is not for me. Thank you for the guaranteed salary and the expense account, but I'm going to go play in pubs and hope for the best.
And then when last words.
I know, it was awful. And it's a terrible realization to have, too. You realize, like, oh, man, this is like kind of the only thing I want to do. So once you've made that realization, you're like, all right, now I think I need to fill in some gaps in my knowledge base because, like you, I was either self-taught or I'd taken private lessons, or I took like one sort of summer school thing at night at the Base Institute of Technology out in Hollywood, but they're very kind of minimal rudimentary training. So what I decided was if I was going to actually try to make a full-time go at it, to have income from nothing but playing music, I really needed to fill in a lot of gaps. I was not any kind of sight reader. My music theory was kind of tenuous, basic at best, and no arranging skills, no compositional training, any of that kind of stuff. So I went to Berklee late, but I was in a hurry to get in and get out because I'd already, getting so old in life, 26 years old, my career is passing me by.
Yeah.
So I graduated from Berklee in 18 months. I did 5 straight semesters, got in, got out, took a sort of a custom built major called professional music of only the stuff that I wanted to study, got my diploma, and then hightailed it back to New York City, where I've been since 1992. This is my 30th year in New York.
All right. And again, like I said, I'm self-taught in many. I took guitar lessons, but sure, that was 100 years ago. But it's worked out for me. I'm writing original stuff. I'm doing things. I just played in my own strength. But then stuff comes up, and I do a lot of work in theater, and so and also just for my own music. Sometimes I go, okay, I think that could use some strings, and then I realize I have no idea how strings work, and so it takes a lot of time. I had to go to YouTube and go to read blogs and things, and just figure out the range of these instruments and figure out what instruments are there in a string quartet and so on.
Right.
And so I'm sure that, if that's something that I imagine that the process would have been faster if I had more formal education.
Maybe. And the parallel that I will draw is like, I took arranging courses and learned all these, way to voice dissonant chords for this heavy jazz, big band kind of stuff, and then never used any of that stuff. I don't write for, dissonant big bands. That's not what I do. What I get hired to do is soul music bands. I spent like 13 years on the road as music director for Sam Moore from Sam and Dave. And these are playing all the Stax hits, Hold On, I'm Coming, I'm a Soul Man, that kind of stuff like that. So what I was doing was arranging for 3 or 4 horns in a soul band. And that's a very practical piece of knowledge that you have to learn by trial and error. You learn by, looking up in a reference book or YouTube video. Just the same thing you're saying. Like, what's the range? What's the practical range of a trumpet? How do you write it? It's transposing. It's a B flat instrument instead of a C instrument. You had to learn these things kind of on the job.
Yeah.
And there was I remember one part we were at a gig in Nashville, I think, and there was no trombone part for this one song, and I had a trombonist. He had to read something, so I had a baritone sax part. So the baritone sax is an E flat instrument. The trombone reads in C concert. If you take the baritone part and put it in front of the trombone player and say, ignore the key signature, suddenly the notes worked. So he could play the baritone sax part by reading it on sight. They don't teach that at Berklee. I had to learn that, in the trenches, like, wow, you can swap those parts out. Okay, good. Now I know that.
Yeah. Well, learning by doing is tends to work. Unless you're an airline pilot, then
you got to have some experience training miles. But then he also like in doing transcriptions. So like when I was music directing with Sam, he'd say, okay, so now I want to play. He wanted to do a cover version of "Unchain My Heart," the Ray Charles tune.
Yeah.
So now I have to go transcribe the record for myself and try to figure out what the horn voicing is. So then I can write it down to give it to my people to play. And I'm realizing it's just a unison line. They're all just playing da 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 da. Like there's no voicing to it at all.
Right.
For a lot of the soul parts. And the Memphis horns, on the stack stuff, they were just tenor and trumpet, so you don't have more than two notes in a voicing. Mm. So as I was, living through this live working experience, you gain education by doing in a way that music school doesn't necessarily help. All right, here's another good example. Lenny Pickett, who is the lead tenor sax player in Tower of Power, the guy who played on What Is Hip and all this stuff. He's been the music director of Saturday Night Live on NBC for 30 years, long time. I remember meeting him in a bar in New York one time, and somehow music education, Berklee came up, and he said, "No, I never went to Berklee. I always wanted to do that." And I was like, "Whoa, Lenny, you don't understand. Every guy at Berklee, every student at Berklee would give their left arm to be able to do what you do. Yeah. You went to the University of Tower of Power." Yeah. You know what I mean? Like he learned in the real world how to do these things, but he somehow sort of, because he didn't have the diploma, felt that he was missing some knowledge. I was like, "No, dude, you believe me, you have way more practical experience than any amount of classroom time would ever give you."
Yeah. And I always feel like, right now is the best time ever to be a musician in many ways, even though, yes, people aren't buying as many records and music has been devalued and that sort of thing. But in terms of creativity,
oh, amazing.
I mean,
the file sharing you can do.
Figuring out the, and even just, figuring out the range of an instrument.
Yeah.
Buy a software instrument.
Yeah.
It'll only allow you to play those notes.
That's right.
So, it's great for me because I realized this after I had spent hours Googling the range of a cello, and then I opened up the virtual cello that I had, and I was, oh yeah, that was quicker.
Right.
But you when we exchanged some messages before, you talked about a tool, like a tool for successful writing, involving themes and variations. And I would love to get you to tell me more about that, because again, my limited understanding, I sort of understood what you were talking about, but it's something that I don't know much about, and I'm very selfish on this podcast. It's basically just whatever I can learn. That's what I want to talk about. And hopefully other people will learn stuff as well.
It's this is how we all learn, by having our own curiosity. So I agree with this method 1,000%. The concept I was talking about is kind of a simple one: theme variation, variation. And why I say this is a secret tool for successful writing is because it gets used so many ways and in so many different styles of music and applications of music that it has benefit. It'll provide benefit to so many different areas of composing, writing, singing, improvising, playing, even making up a bass line, which is what I do all day, and it comes from, this is a classical idea that goes way, way, way back. When you think about the Beethoven thing, da 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 da, da 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 da. We got the theme. We repeated the theme. Da 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 da. Now we're going to do a variation on the theme.
Yeah.
So you have you state a theme, whatever it is. It can be simple. It can be something very simple. It can be 2 notes, like the Beethoven thing, and you say it again, so people know that what you said was intentional. Yes, I said this, and I meant this. And now, A B. Now we're going to play something that's sort of a variation on that theme. And then very often, like in the jazz standard world, which came from the Tin Pan Alley world, which came from the Broadway show tune writing world, those 32 measure, about the 32 measure song form. That's like all the Irving Berlin, all the Cole Porter, all the, not all, but most of the Cole Porter and Gershwin brothers. Those were there was a standard convention back there I called a 32 measure song, which was an A section, a repeated A section, a B section, and then repeat the A section, A, B, A. Each of them 8 bars each.
Okay.
So the A section, you would state your theme, then you would repeat it verbatim.
Yeah.
Then you do a variation for the B section, and then you re-establish the theme. Right? So that became the standard 32 bar song form, which all jazz standards use it, all Broadway tunes use it, Tin Pan Alley, show tunes, all that comes from that. If you think about the blues, and I hate to use the lyric that's from the Doors, which are not standard Chicago African American blues musicians, but it's an easy way to illustrate the point. The lyric is, "I woke up this morning and I got myself a beer."
Yeah.
Repeat the theme. "I woke up this morning and I got myself a beer." Right? A, B, and then the next line is release, and I can't remember what the next line is. But it's like you have a theme, whatever it is, however simple it is, repeat it verbatim.
Yeah.
And then then do the variation on the theme, and that's very common.
Hey Joe is
yes,
that's a better example because it's actually African Americans.
Yeah. Well, I should be quoting Willie Dixon if I'm quoting anybody, but
Willie Dixon. Oh yeah, he wrote "Hey Joe," didn't he? Yeah.
But that's
Spoonful as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And Backdoor Man, Willie Dixon.
That spoonful is great. That spoon, that spoonful.
Yeah.
Repeat it. That spoon, that spoonful, that spoonful. How am I going to get that spoonful? So A, B.
Yeah.
Theme, variation, right? So that works for song form, composition.
Yeah.
AAB or AABA. It works for melodic composition. You're creating a melody for a tune, ba ba dee da ba 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 dee ba 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 doodly. Have a theme, repeat it exactly.
Yeah.
And so it gives the listener something to hang their hat on.
Yeah.
They know that what you're organizing is intentional. Right? And then when your creativity can show, like, how can I then have a variation, an ornamentation on this theme that sort of makes it interesting.
And also, to riff off this a little bit, I think this is a great vehicle to create hooks in your songs.
100%.
Because I have this theory, or this analysis, if you will, of song hooks. Because I used to do professional stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
And I wrote a thesis on comedy, and I studied joke structure a lot. And a joke structure is very much what you're talking about. You set up, you have your setup and your punchline.
Right.
And the setup is it sets you up with certain expectations.
Right.
So it gets you, if you want to break it down, usually it's it takes either it's referencing something that everyone knows, or it sets up. That's why you always have threes in jokes, right? You get one, and then you get two, and then the third one breaks the pattern.
Right.
And that's the funny part. It breaks the expectations. And it's the same thing. You set it up, you repeat it, then you get the third one, and it's twisting it. It's creating something different. And to me, a hook works because you laugh when you're surprised.
Right.
That's why you don't laugh many times at the same jokes because you know the joke. It's not surprising you anymore.
We know where it's going. That's right.
Yeah. We've heard it before. We're not surprised. So laughter is technically a defense mechanism. And to me, a hook is a similar thing where you take certain expectations, certain familiarity with musical tropes, and you slightly subvert them somehow.
Yes.
And so this is one thing, like A, B, you set it up, you repeat it, and then you create something different, and that's what catches in your brain.
Exactly the same. You that laughter, that little glee that you have emotionally happens the same thing with music. You react to that, like, okay, here's the theme again, got it. Oh, something different. That's delightful.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
That's the thing. And I do this, I've never heard this broken down the way you've been describing, but I realize as I'm listening to you talk that I subconsciously do this a lot. If I'm writing something I work mostly in Americana, so I write a lot of folk, blues, that sort of stuff. And so there's a lot of repeated lines. And I somehow just instinctively, I guess, find myself, if the melody is sort of repeated, then I find on the third go, I'll, go up instead of down, or I'll do a variation to keep it interesting, because listening to the same line 3 times in a row just gets boring.
Right. Well, what you've done without realizing it, you've done a course study in studying the masters. You're repeating the success that you've heard others have by doing that.
Of course. Like,
even if it's not formalized as a compositional technique, and it works for a vocal line, it works for writing a hook, it works for creating a string part as a background line to a singing, to a vocal tune, it works for creating a bass line.
Chord
same
progression.
Thing. Chord progression, 100%.
I do this all the time. Like, if the melody repeats, but then play different chords that work with the same melody, and that creates the variation.
Right. Well, you think of that your 12-bar blues, your AAB form. Yeah. So you state the first theme over the 1 chord. The second time you're stating the same thing, but it's over the 4 chord now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's exactly the same melody, but now you have a different harmonic bed that's under it. And then when you go to the 5 chord, now you got the release or the punchline or whatever, that happens.
Yeah. Exactly.
B.B. King said, "Nobody loves me but my mother." Yeah. On the 1 chord. Now the 4 chord. Nobody loves me but my mother. Nobody loves but my mother, and she might be jiving too.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think this is an incredibly powerful, and I've never heard this, and I've never thought of it, again, as I'm listening to you, I find, of course.
Yeah. You default to it because you've recognized it even unconsciously, and that makes total sense. You've been doing that. But now this is the formalized way of talking about it. Theme variations. Yeah.
And this is what I love about, and this is why I sometimes, I'm not going to say I wish I'd had more, but I sometimes I'm like, if I had, stuck with my schooling and not just gone off to strum my guitar in my room, then a lot of those things maybe would have, because in terms of music theory, I know now how helpful it is as a songwriter to know basic music theory. I mean, just the circle of fifths I learned pretty late in life, and that's invaluable just to speed up the songwriting process. Because, when I was, writing songs ages ago, it's like, okay, I'm going to have to test every single chord to figure out which one works in this spot. Whereas, once I actually figured out, oh, this is how keys work, and this is the circle of, and all that, then, okay, I know what, the 8 or 10 or 12 or however, depending on how jazzy you want to be, the chords are that are going to work with this thing that I'm doing.
Right.
And so this, again, something that I've always done instinctively, but now I feel like that's going to be really helpful to understand this and to then apply it methodically, like I can now apply, keys and scales to my songwriting.
You think about it too. This even applies to sort of popular songwriting, like pop songwriting form. The standard there's so many people, the template that so many people use: verse, chorus, bridge, chorus,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
there's like, A B, C, A, or B B.
A
So
BB,
it's
yeah.
yeah. So it's the same sort of thing. It's a little slightly more convoluted than A, but it's A B, C, B.
Sure, yeah.
B B.
Yeah, no, but still, it's,
Theme,
one
variation.
thing repeated and then the variation. Yeah.
Yes.
And that was actually, I was going to ask you that next, like how this relates to song structure.
Right.
And it kind of makes me wonder, like, because, as we know, there are different song structures for different genres.
Mm-hmm.
So is this something that is universal across genres, or is there a difference between genres with this?
It's almost universal. I mean, there are certainly people who spend most of their careers trying to break the mold, trying to break the formulas, trying to play free. We're playing free. Mm-hmm. Like if you think about Ornette Coleman, the free jazz movement, mm-hmm. we're playing anything we think or anything we feel. Now, when I was at Berklee, one of the courses I took with a great professor named Ed Tomasi was Harmonic Concepts and Improvisation, I think it was what it was called. So we had to do 4 full transcriptions that semester. One of them was Coltrane, one was McCoy Tyner, one of them was somebody else, and one of them was Ornette Coleman. And I'm thinking, what's he playing? It sounds like totally garbly-gook, But then when I sit down and I wrote out, I had to go listen, rewind, listen, rewind, listen, rewind. Every note that he plays, what you come to find out is that he's organizing all of his ideas in this same way: theme, variation, theme, variation. It's completely deliberate, totally organized.
Yeah.
But he's got 5 people playing with him who are also doing this, but maybe in different keys and different intervals and different, rhythms. So it sounds like cacophony. But then when I came to realize, I saw at one time a documentary footage of the painter Jackson Pollock,
mm-hmm.
Who's famous for all the splatter paintings that he does, right?
Yeah.
So Jackson had a garage out on Long Island, I think,
Yeah.
And he put a canvas on the floor, and he used to listen to like Dixieland jazz. That was his thing, man. So he put on Dixieland jazz, and he would take his a dowel, a piece of wood, and would dip it in a bucket of paint, and he would go X pattern, X pattern, X pattern, X pattern, walk down the canvas. And he'd take a different color, orange, dip it in the paint, go circle pattern, circle pattern, circle pattern, circle pattern, walk down the canvas. And I was like, it's Ornette Coleman. Everything he's doing is organized chaos.
Yeah.
Because when you walk down the canvas 80 times now with 4 different colors and 80 different patterns, you come out with a total splatter effect. And that's the way Ornette Coleman originally sounded to me. It was like, this is chaos. Yeah. And then when you sort of break it down into just component parts, it's like, nope, theme, variation, theme, variation. It was very illuminating to me as a young person. I really enjoyed figuring that out.
Yeah, I think to me, improvisation, whether musical or in theater, which is where I have most of my improvisational experience from, it needs a framework, to work.
Exactly, right.
And I think the wilder you want to get, the more restraints you need, because there are certainly artists in all disciplines who just do whatever completely free flow and just make noises and whatnot. But, so there are exceptions to everything, and I'm not going to put down people who do that. But I think that, in terms of, especially if you want to create something that people will enjoy taking in, then there needs to be a method, I think, to the madness, And
I agree with that, and I think that anytime that you've sort of seen sort of a large innovation in a musical genre, whatever it is, it's built upon the people that came before it. They're taking the things that they know. Like, for instance, if you think about like the bebop jazz guys that were coming up in the 40s and 50s, they were taking Broadway show tunes that already existed, this AABA 32 measure form we're talking about, and then sort of applying the harmonic concepts that they'd gotten from the French impressionistic composers, and then the new rhythmic things that they were working out with this highly syncopated hoo-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-ba-doo-li-bop, And then when it came time to do some of their recordings, they would take the chord changes, the structure for one of these standard songs, so it's AABA, 32 measures. It's, it's in the key of G minor, whatever it is, and then they would compose their own melodies to it using the bebop techniques that they were developing. So they were hanging it upon a framework that was eminently recognizable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think going back to how hooks work, I think that, that's another example of that, where you have something familiar and then you subvert it. It's the same with hip hop in many cases. I think, you 100%. A lot of hip hop DJs will take a familiar song or, a line from a song or whatever it is, and add a hip hop beat. And there all of a sudden, bam, and that's the hook.
Yes.
In many cases, in many of the
how that started, right? That was called the break beat. So like if there was a section of a song that had just like a 2 measure, 4 measure, 1 measure drum break, was just drums and everything else sort of dropped away. The DJs would take that and they would, on the turntables, repeat that loop, that loop. So then the rappers had something to talk over. So they were talking over breaks. There was like, the coolest part of the record was it kind of broke down to the drums and the congas. You're like, oh, this is great. And that would become the whole hip hop song now. Yeah. And somebody would rhyme on top of that. It's absolutely, you build on what's come before you. That's always the way it's been done.
And those were like jazz, like the most famous is the Amen beat, which comes from I think a jazz, or maybe it's a blues track or something.
Yeah.
It was a break. It was like a part of a drum solo, and, and they slowed it down, and it's the basis of hip hop and drum and bass, and everything comes from that one drum break,
right?
Which is crazy.
That's right. But, that was the inspiration, the spark. That lit a wildfire.
Yeah, and I totally I love that. About it needs to come from somewhere, and that's kind of. If you think about the Beatles, which, so much innovation, they basically created modern rock and roll in many ways. And it was built on such strong traditions. They start out by basically mixing together rhythm and blues and skiffle.
Yes.
Two very traditional things.
Yep.
And then later on, when they get into their even more innovative period, Sgt. Pepper's and that whole thing, then they're taking like folk music and world music and Indian influences. They're taking all of these different influences and mixing them together. They're not creating anything new. They're just blending stuff together. And of course, a very classical thing with George Martin doing these string arrangements,
right?
And creating, and I think that's, you listen to this, sitar and string sections and all of this stuff brought together. You think, wow, that is a lot of different traditions coming together.
Yeah, it is.
All of them building on like ancient things.
Yeah. Those guys were like sponges. They were absorbing everything around them. And they also, again, they started with the jazz standard, the Broadway standard, the show tunes, Till There Was You. They covered that. They wrote that.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they wrote it. They recorded that. And that's just one of those standard 32 measure AABA things. Another thing that the Beatles use all the time, there's one of their techniques that they use, which goes to the AABA theme.
Yeah.
They'll use non-diatonic chords. You know what I mean when I say non-diatonic chords?
Nope.
It means this is a chord. Diatonic means of the key.
Right.
So non-diatonic means it's a chord
Yeah.
that's not in the keys. So big example I use in there are places I remember, right? So the diatonic chord, 1 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, flat 7 chord.
Right.
So if you're looking at a major scale, we're in the key, in the key, in the key, out of the key.
Yeah.
And then they come back in. They do this over and over again. So like it's, in the key, in the key, in the key, out of the key, back in.
Yeah. And that's a great, and I've used that a lot.
Sure.
And that's a great way to create, like, again, subverting the expectations, because even as listeners, even though we don't know why, we understand that that's off somehow. And if it's and it's sometimes, a lot of the times for me, it's just as simple as I'll play a major chord instead of a minor chord.
Right.
For the
chord,
E here, or whatever.
Yeah.
And that'll, and it really might not matter for the melody, whether it's a major or minor chord, but it'll just sound more interesting to use.
More interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen, and the Beatles there, and I think that's possibly for them, or probably stems from, they were self-taught and they just didn't know. I mean, Paul McCartney, to my knowledge, still doesn't read music.
No.
And and I watched this great documentary where Rick Rubin and Paul McCartney are.
I heard about that. I didn't see that one. Yeah.
It's fantastic. You should watch it.
Yeah.
But there's this great, and Paul's telling all these stories about how these songs came to be, and a lot of the time it's just, like Michelle, he like learned this chord. And so he's like, oh, I'm going to put this in a song.
Yeah.
And so it was a song that he would used to play at parties, like in mock French, because he thought it made him sound cool.
Yeah.
And then and he taught. So it's just like, oh, I learned this new chord. I better put it in somewhere. And then he, when they were recording Penny Lane, the what's it called, the piccolo trumpet?
Yeah, that's right.
That solo.
Yep.
He like talked to George Martin. I was like, because he heard it at some concert, and he was like,
right.
I want that for the solo. He talked to George Martin. He said, yeah, I know the best piccolo trumpet player.
The guy from the London Philharmonic. He'll be right over.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then and he came over, and of course Paul didn't have sheet music, so they were like, so what do you want it to sound? He was like, just so he just sang it, and they were like, yeah, and they wrote it down.
Yeah, George
and
is
then
going
and then it wanted to end.
Yeah.
And the guy went, all right, that's outside the official range of the piccolo trumpet. And he's like, I'm sure you can do it.
Yeah.
And so he did it. And so that note is out of range for the instrument.
In New York City, in the recording sessions, they call that's a double scale note. Like,
right.
there's guys that can play that, but you're gonna have to pay them twice the union rate to get him to come into the studio, because it's got to be that good, that guy.
But I just think that's sort of, it's guys like Paul McCartney who don't, and they're like, I want that note, and he's like, well, that's not in the.
That's gonna cost you.
I mean, can you find a way?
Like, yeah,
sure, yeah, I can do that.
Thank God he didn't go to music school. If he had gone to music school, he never would have written that piccolo trumpet solo.
Exactly. Yeah. They did things like there's it's a solo in, what is it? Is it Hard Day's Night? It's Hard Day's Night, I think, where the solo is really fast, and they couldn't play it. It was too fast. They'd written the solo, but it was too fast for them to play. So they just slowed the tape down.
Right.
And did it that way, like an octave lower.
Yeah.
And sped it up. And, and that's something that today, that's sure. Yeah, you do that. Back in 1960, what was it, 5 or something? That's not a thing that people did. They invented that.
Yeah, that was some innovation. Well, actually, that had been sort of perfected slightly before then with like Alvin and the Chipmunks. They recorded all those voices at half speed and then sped them double speed. That's the harpsichord's solo on which song is I'm forgetting it was. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, it's double speed. Like nobody could play that in actual fact because it's a double speed harpsichord part, George Martin, I think George had to play it himself, but at half tempo, down an octave.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, they probably did it a bunch of times. But it's also the guitar solo on Hard Day's Night where it goes,
Yeah.
They couldn't do that lick
Right.
fast enough
Right.
or accurately enough, I guess. So they slowed it down. And if you listen to it, you can hear that the guitar sounds weird because
the
it's
tone
playing
is
in
weird,
a range,
right?
but it's got those bottom string sounds. But
There's a story that Carl Perkins used to tell. Like he recorded one of his old rockabilly tunes using a slapback echo. So he would play a note, dot, dot, dot. There was an echo for each note. And he said the first time he met the Beatles, George Harrison said, "Oh, I learned that solo." And he played it, dot, 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 dot. He played it like he played each note double, as if they're with no effects. And Carl said, "You're the only person in the world that can do that because that's not how I did it in the studio." They didn't realize that there was an effect on it, So.
Yeah. Well, they taught themselves. And my favorite thing, we're going off on wild tangents here, but I don't
care.
But did you see Get Back?
I did. I suffered through all 8 hours of it, or however long it is.
Yeah. I love it. Because it almost gets boring, but it never quite gets boring.
Right.
But it's fascinating to me because we're watching people at work.
Yeah.
You're watching work days. That's what you're watching.
Yeah.
And to me, it was such because I live and breathe by the notion that if you want to be a songwriter and you want to do it seriously, you need to have a work ethic. You need to just do the work. It's not about waiting until inspiration strikes. That doesn't work. At least most of the times it doesn't.
Not consistent, that's for sure.
Yeah. And watching they're the Beatles, and at that point they're at the peak of their fame and everything, and they've made Sgt. Pepper's, they've made Magical Mystery Tour and the White Album and all that stuff,
right?
And they're sort of and they just show up to work and they sit for hours and hours and hours writing music and
just hammering it out
and rehearsing. Yeah, and just making it happen.
Yep.
And it's such a I think because they could very easily at that point have just been let's get together in a couple of years when we have something.
And as you say, right, as you say through that whole documentary too, they're doing exactly what we've been talking about this whole thing. Theme variation. Get back. Get back. Get back to where you once belong. Right.
Exactly.
Theme variation, and it's through because they're so seasoned at that point. They've absorbed all these conventions and techniques from all these various sources in their where they've gained their inspiration from over the years. And it just becomes second nature to them now. And again, as you say, like they would find inspiration in a bass line or in a chord. Like, oh, I got to write a song. You need a song, that goes with that chord. And Get Back is two chords. The whole thing is two chords, but he's still got theme variation, right?
Yeah,
it's genius.
It absolutely is, and to watch that being born, like live, like, oh, John's late.
Yeah,
let's play around with the bass a little bit. Oh, look, this sounds all right. Ringo, play some drums.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize too, like every time Paul's playing piano, John's playing bass.
Yeah.
Like I didn't realize how much bass John played on that record until I saw it. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, he's playing that guitar bass thing, right?
It's called a Fender Bass 6.
Yeah.
So it's a 6-string bass. It's tuned down an octave from a standard guitar. It's like standard guitar tuning down an octave. The strings are really narrow. So guitar players could kind of figure out how it worked, without being dedicated bass players. But it's a bass. It's called a Fender Bass 6. Instrument. Yeah.
It's got a very very Beatles sound. You can hear. I think it's on While My Guitar Gently Weeps has that on. I think it's actually Paul playing it there, but it is definitely that bass, and it has that sort of slightly rough.
It's very
sound.
thumpy. It's very distorted.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
That bass line in that song is the most insane. Paul's bass lines shouldn't work as bass lines,
right?
But
he's because he started out as a melodic singer.
Yeah.
So he had all these melodics involved, and his bass lines. I was just talking to a student of mine earlier today. I was looking at a transcription that I'd done of A Day in the Life.
Yeah.
And his bass lines are theme, variation, themes. He's doing this A thing throughout the way he composes his lines.
Yeah.
And, he does it vocally, he does it on the bass, he does it melodically, he does it harmonically.
Yeah.
So if you have all these structures that are deliberate at every level of the composition, that's what makes the thing like just bulletproof. People know that it's deliberate, it's organized, it's purposeful. And still, when you hear these variations on the theme, it's delightful. Like, that's great. Yeah.
And let me ask you this. Does this apply to arrangements as well?
100%, or even more arrangements, because, if you're talking about orchestration, like a lot of Broadway shows, you'll have a theme, a little melodic little fragment.
Yeah.
And just like by the end of the show, it's been passed around the orchestra. The piccolo has played it, and the cello has played it, and the guitar has played it. It's completely deliberate. Like, we got the theme, and then we'll state it again with another instrument, and then we'll put it in another instrument. So it might be the same melody, but the variation is the fact that now it's the oboe playing it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At every level, arrangement-wise, orchestrationally, compositionally, it's that you can have that thing, that idea in the back of your head. Even like horn arrangements on the Memphis Soul sort of stuff. Ba, ba,
right,
ba up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like theme, something really simple, theme, and then you double up the stab. You make it a variation.
Yeah,
it's such a powerful thing, and the reason, I mean, I've always known about it and I've always been conscious of it, but like as I was sort of studying to be a soloist, for the once a month that somebody says bass solo, I'm like, oh, okay, cool, But like I was studying, there's a guy named Willie Weeks who's played on the Donny Hathaway Live at the Bitter End album, and they give him a long bass solo in this song called Everything Is Everything. And he just he sets up a theme, and he kind of beats it to death, and then he sort of varies it. Then he goes into another thing, and he kind of beats that to death, and then varies it, and then he goes into another theme. It's so deliberate, and so delightful to listen to as a listener, because he's taking you on the journey with him. You know exactly where one is, you know exactly what key he's in, you know exactly the melodic fragment that he's now playing with and developing over time, very smart. And that's a solo.
Yeah. It was a trick that I picked up when I was figuring out how to do a string quartet arrangement. And I did it for a song. And the song has, I think, 4 verses. And it's a folk song. It doesn't have a chorus. It's, just A. It's that's the structure, but it certainly does have a theme variation. Now that I think of it, but in terms of the string arrangement, what I is so the first one I think just had cello, and then more strings come in, and then I swapped the violin parts so that the bottom one, the one that was below, was playing above, and the one. So it sounds like it's a new string arrangement, but it's the same lines. They're
you just inverted the voicing.
Yeah. And it works incredibly. It was like this really it was a big time saver, because it's like, this gets a little bit repetitive. Oh no, I'll just do this, and then hey, it's fine. Same notes.
Same notes. And you want to use the same notes. Like you want to use these same notes because you've developed that's the thematic material that you're working with. So it's not being repetitive or boring necessarily, because
no.
when you're again changing the inversion. So you have a root position chord. Now you've got one that's got a third in the bass, one that's got a fifth in the bass. You can have all the same chord. You can voice it 4 different ways if it's a 4-note chord, and which notes on the bottom, which notes on the top. Again, very powerful. And what you're talking about is a pretty subtle difference by just changing the inversion of the 2 voices. But it's very pleasing because you've heard it twice already before.
Yeah.
Then the third time through is like, now we're going to do this. You're like, yes, nicely done.
Yeah. Yeah. This is I mean, it's so simple and it's so unbelievably powerful.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like almost, it shouldn't be this simple. It feels like, this almost feels like cheating.
Right. And it also feels like once you've really thought about it and analyzed it, it seems so obvious. Like, how does everybody not know this? Yeah. But what I've noticed is, like, again, this goes to the specific soloing. So if you're playing a solo on an instrument, ostensibly you're composing a piece in real time. That's the idea.
Yeah.
So you have to use these compositional techniques in real time to make the solo successful. So when I've been, I've spent many, many years like being in the house band at a jam session, where it's like, we'd have a core group and then people would get up and they would sit in and we'd be playing blues or something. So immediately when the guy is just sitting in, the first guy sitting in, and say, okay, take a guitar solo. He's going to play every lick he knows, like, willy, 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 look at me, look at me, look at me. And I'm like, okay. Then we go to the keyboard solo. The keyboard is going to play every lick he knows, widdly, 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 widdly. Like, there's no breath in it. There's no space in it. Then they go to the other guitar player, take another guitar solo, widdly, 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 widdly. And I'm just like, man, there's no air in the room. And then they point at me and they go, take a bass solo. I'm like, okay, listen, here's what we're going to do. And then I would just play something simple.
Yeah.
Repeat the something simple. Little variation on the something simple, like something I'm doing this AABA theme variation, just absolutely dead simple. And then maybe build to something more complicated, maybe not. Because coming from what you've heard is just like this cascade of notes, followed by a cascade of notes, followed by a cascade of notes. Then I played some rests. Like, I left some space in the room. People are like, this is great. Leave any air in the room. And again, playing these very simple theme variations. And I can't tell you how many times people come up to say, man, your solo, that was an amazing solo. I was like, you don't know how simple that was.
Yeah.
For me to think of, conceive, and execute, because I just kept to this idea, this theme variation, and it works over and over again at every level. Orchestration, you have a 100-piece orchestra, you still use this idea,
Theme variation is unbelievable. Speaking of solo, I'm not much of a soloist, but I do 90% of the time nowadays I create my music all on my own. So if I need a solo, I'm playing the solo.
Sure.
And I think the best advice when I started to sort of figure out how to actually compose and play solos was to think of solos like vocal lines.
Yes.
And make sure that you breathe.
Yes.
Because it's uncomfortable to listen to a solo where there's no breath.
Right.
And this also helped me. I instinctively understood how to arrange for horns when I started to do that, because obviously horn players need to breathe.
They have to breathe, or else they fall over.
Otherwise, they die. So you need to write the breaths into that thing.
Yes.
And so I think that, and really, if you think about some of the best soloists, like quote unquote best, like when people say, "Oh yeah, great soloist," a lot of them don't play a lot of notes. Dave Gilmour,
right? Yeah.
Excellent soloist,
the king of space.
Yes, everything very simple. Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite guitar players is Brian May. Very. I mean, there are some complex solos, but mostly they're pretty simple. He's not the most technical guitarist anyway, but he plays with a lot of feel and and a lot of space,
a lot of expression. But if he's got a shred, if he's going to do some shreddy stuff, because he does some shreddy stuff, but he doesn't start there. He gets there. He
builds up to it.
Right. And again, from the theme, the variation, the theme. And then finally, by the end of it, you get to this crescendo, and people are like, this guy's amazing, Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's if you going back to classical music, I mean, I love Rachmaninoff, and that's like big music. The piano concertos. It goes into incredible stuff, but it starts off very simple and soft, and not everything starts off like Beethoven's Fifths. And even that, it starts off like that, but then it goes down. And then it goes back up again.
It's like super pianissimo.
I'm doing this show, and I arranged. I actually didn't. There's a choral arrangement in there, which I got somebody else to do. But I have all these strings and different crazy parts in this one song. It starts from. I'm very proud of this. It starts from us sort of teaching. We're just me and the other guy with the guitar, and it's like. So you want to sing along, and we teach them a line so one line, and then sort of interjections, and it becomes this little dance with the audience, and then we sort of go, and then from the rear speakers, they're supposed to bleed in like a massive choir,
right,
with them, and it's all arranged. They're just doing it in unison, but the choir is like doing it in 4 different voices and all over. And then another choir comes in singing along with the main melody as well. So we got like 100-person choir, and it sort of bleeds in slowly. So I'm hoping once we open that the audience will be like, "Wow, he sounded amazing" for a little bit, and then. Oh, all right. Yeah, I see what happened. There's an orchestra there and everything.
Yeah, this
just
got
the two
big.
of us on stage, but
yeah. This suddenly got really big.
Yeah. But it's all about that crescendo and how it builds, and
sure.
But this has been amazing. I've learned so much, and learned stuff that I guess I instinctively understood. But now I feel like I can actually use this,
right?
And it's going to speed up things for me.
I think it's a simple concept that I've known about it for 30 years or more. I've had it in the back of my head, but now once it became formalized, it has applications to sort of every level of complexity. So even like, playing in a blues trio, and up to 100 voice orchestra, depending on whatever level of stuff you're doing. Like even if you're starting to do more and more complex stuff, or having more advanced harmonic concepts or more advanced arranging things, it's still, this same thing applies. This AABA concept applies. And it works out, and it makes your stuff stronger. Even the more techniques that you involve, the more people in the orchestra you involve. Everybody's. It gives the listener something to hang their hat on, and it's so effective. It's so effective.
It's unbelievable, and again, shortcut to being effective and creating hooks.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing this stuff.
My pleasure.
Before we say goodbye. Tell everyone where they can find you and and your stuff.
All my stuff is available at funkboy.net, funkboy.net. Has links to all of my recordings, all of my music, my book that just came out called Am I Famous Yet? Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star, in which I recount endless road stories from decades of shenanigans. I'll say it that way to be nice. And then all, links to all my YouTube, all my social medias, all that stuff is all found at funkboy.net. Everything is there.
Awesome. And I'll post a link to that as well.
Yeah. Cheers.
Ivan, thanks so much again. And I'll see you later.
Man, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Yeah.